Hey guys, I'm pretty sure you all remember when I started talking about doing a Sharpe video a while back about the book series. And my original plan was to read all of the books, all 25 of them, and slice all of the individual reviews of the book together into one big video until I ran into a problem in that one, it's 25 books, and it is incredibly hard to work on a video of that length for that period of time. And honestly, the review of the first book is like 15 minutes long. It is going to be 3 hours long at this rate, and no one wants that. So I have decided to scrap all of my original plan for how the video would go and they just do a bunch of individual videos for each individual book. And I already had an intro planned out for the long version of the video, but I'm going to redo that again because frankly it's annoying to have to keep it as it was. So I'm going to redo the intro and I'm going to just leave the video section for the first book, Sharpe's Tiger, as it was, which will be coming after the intro and this little Prelude if you want that I'm doing. I'll put the timestamp up if you want to skip past all of that. I ended up having this whole thing going where I had actually a lot of graphics for the intro, but considering that I'm re-recording it, I can't really be bothered to do the graphics again. And frankly, if you're already here watching this video, you probably know how the Sharpe series works, so I think it's fine if I just explain it to you really well using my voice. Luckily, the actual Sharpe's Tiger video has graphics, so you'll be getting that as well. When I start doing the other books and other videos, I will be better at it, but right now this is just a stopgap until I can get my motivation back. Because frankly, I do want to review these books, and I do want to read them, but it was getting really hard to be motivated when I was staring down the barrel of 25 different reviews and nearly 3 hours worth of footage if I multiply that 15-minute estimate from earlier by 25. So I decided instead to split it all up into 25 individual videos. Makes the workload more manageable for me because I'm lazy as fuck, but it also makes it easier for anyone else to watch it because, let's be real, who is watching 3-hour videos in one sitting? Not me. Unless I'm writing fan fiction, but even then not very often. So here's how I got into Sharpe. I follow a blog on Tumblr called SeanBeanSimp59, and the reason I followed them was because they post some really good Wilford content sometimes. This was back when season 2 of Snowpiercer was still going on. And back in October, they began reblogging the Wumptober content from a certain author called Roke Amadi. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, sorry if I'm not. And the fandom they were writing for was Sharpe, starring Sean Bean. And this fic was about the coughing up a lung prompt, which intrigued me. So I went and read it and just nearly had a stroke. Every day since that one day, Roke Amadi would post another Wumptober entry and Sean Bean Simp 59 would reblog it faithfully, and then I would bookmark them and download them because I liked them so much. But then Roke Amadi posted a fic called Made to Watch, and this fic is about the eponymous Sharpe getting tortured by waterboarding, and his lover, Patrick Harper, is forced to watch. And of course this all sounded right up my alley when it popped up on my Tumblr timeline, and I was finally induced to find out about the Sharpe guy. So there's two pieces of media, the book series and the TV series. I'm trying to make my way through the TV series, but it's kind of hard. I find it hard to get into new TV series. And, since Snowpiercer is king in my mind, I decided to make the difficult decision to slow my roll on younger, long-haired Sean Bean for the moment and investigate the book series instead. It's written by Bernard Cornwell, who is famed for a long series of historical novels. And I did actually read the first book of The Last Kingdom, which is a book he did, and I watched a few episodes of the Netflix series, and I didn't really like that. But then I read a sample of the first book of Sharpe on my Kindle, and I liked it, so I decided to get into it properly. So, on to Sharpe. The series is named for its main character, Richard Sharpe, who begins the series as a private in the Duke of Wellington Regiment in the British Army, climbing through the ranks over the course of the series to become a lieutenant by the 22nd book, and after that book, Sharpe's Waterloo, his military career ends, but he still gets up to stuff as a civilian. There are 25 books. All of the books, with the exception of maybe 2, are about battles or invasions or campaigns of some kind. And I know that the setting of this book, the early 19th century, was the prime time for the British Empire's pillaging, plundering, looting, colonizing, the dirty past. And Sharpe spends most of his adult life in the army, starting out on the bottom and working his way up. But the fact that this Sharpe guy manages to show up for 23 or so different history-making events during what amounts to a 15-year time period is really funny to me. I just love that he's always in the right place at the right time. A lot of things go right for that guy. The thing about these books is that even though they have a chronological order to them within the Sharpe universe, they were not actually written that way in real life. The series originally began in 1981 with the 8th book, Sharpe's Eagle, and the last book, Sharpe's Assassin, was published in 2021, and it is the 23rd of a 25-book series. And the author basically jumped about the timeline, writing prequels and sequels, and it's insane, I tell you. It makes it really difficult to buy the books online because some retailers number the books by in-universe time placement and others will do it by real-life year of publication. It's very annoying. And I decided I'd go by the in-universe chronological order, which is why the first video, this one, is about Sharpe's Tiger. Just a heads up, the Sharpe's Tiger video that's coming up has been already recorded for about a month now, and it's literally just been languishing in my folders until now when I decided to drag it out and post it. So if it sounds a bit weird, that's why. Number 1. Sharpe's Tiger. I have a lot to say about this book in particular because it happens to be the first book of the series, and I know this is going to be a really super long explanation for what is a reasonably short book, but since this is the first one and this is the first time we get to see Sharpe in all his glory, I'm going to have to say all of these things. I have a lot of thoughts, but I assume the books after this one will be a little less heavy on the speaking because I've already gotten my beginning thoughts out of the way. Anyway, to start with quite possibly the most stupidest and empty-headed thought I have about this book. It's stupid, but I have to say it. In this novel, we see that Sharpe's crazy sergeant and other people refer to him a lot as Sharpe. I'm not sure what the point of that was because it seemed kind of childish. I mean, I know it's meant in complete seriousness, but I read it and it just instantly takes me out. Like the first person who calls him that is Hakeswill, who is Sharpe's tyrannical sergeant, and I thought, okay, this guy is very despotic, he's very abusive, maybe this is his way of demeaning Sharpe by calling him some stupid nickname that nobody else takes seriously. But so many of his friends and allies call him that, it's insane. I didn't even know at this point, but every time I read it, knowing that it was meant to be taken seriously, I cannot stop thinking of like a Sharpie permanent marker. I have one in my pencil case. 2, in fact. Dick Sharpie. Not sure what's up with that, but yeah, that's something. Okay, on to something a little bit more analytical. One thing we get in this book, and it's quite a big important thing, is we get a very brief rundown of Sharpe's beginnings. He was born to a whore, his words, in a poor part of London. He spends his childhood in a foundling home and is named for the wealthy benefactor who owns the home. And we also get a explanation for why he joined the army to begin with, the king's shilling, or the single shilling that was given to every prospective army recruit to incentivize them into joining. Considering that Sharpe lived in abject poverty most of his life, it makes sense that that's why he'd join. Since this is the first book, we get to see Sharpe's personality for the first time, and he has an interesting duality to him. I've seen that mentioned a lot online. He's firstly very savage sometimes. He has no qualms killing or looting people on the battlefield. There's never any thought given by him to the people that he's killing. They're his enemies, and they have loot that he can take, and that's the only thing he needs to know about them to want to kill them violently. And there's also a fair amount of talk given to the frustrations of his life. So even though a big trait of his is that he doesn't dwell on his circumstances too much, and he can't dwell on it too much because of the fighting he's doing, you can tell that there's a lot of extremely deep-seated dissatisfaction and disillusionment with how his life has turned out. He's on the bottom of the dung heap, in his own words, constantly belittled and harassed by his superiors, yet he's also capable of being really gentle and sweet, especially towards the woman he's crushing on and wants to marry. She leaves him for another guy, and he's actually remarkably okay with that. Something to be said for that, I guess. I did very much like how clearly Sharpe's personality was shown, even in the first quarter of the book, which at the time of recording this specific part is how far I've made it into the book. Don't worry, by the time I get into the actual plot and everything, I will have read the whole thing, but there were also some beginning thoughts that I could have written down without having to ever talk about the plot, so you're getting to hear them first. One thing about the book that I did have mixed feelings on was how often the narrative liked to veer away from Sharpe in order to focus on other characters. We see POVs from Sergeant Hakeswill, Captain Morris, who's his superior and also wants to go out with the girl that Sharpe is crushing on, and others like the villain of this book and also the Colonel. We'll talk about the Colonel in a bit. And while I'm not the hugest fan of this because I like Sharpe and I wanted to read about him specifically, I also appreciate the effort that the author's taken to show that the world he's created is inhabited by other non-Sharpe entities. They have their own foibles, their own motivations, and it makes the world feel lived in, like it could have actually happened in real life, and that there are multiple things going on outside of the main character. And too often, I think in a lot of books, there's not enough development given to surrounding characters, aka main character syndrome. It makes the book feel quite shallow in that the only reason the events happen or the circumstances exist is because of the main character and nothing else. And I also think that if it wasn't for the fact that all of these characters do matter to Sharpe in some way or actively influence his fate, I think I'd be a lot more resentful as to why we have to be introduced to so many randos. I guess there's also something to be said for Bernard Cornwell's writing style in general. He's a big fan of run-on sentences, but they aren't actually as haphazard as that term would imply. They're actually created quite artfully in the sense that they don't feel like run-on sentences. Even though some of his lines go for nearly a full half page without a full stop, you don't feel like you're reading a super long sentence. The way that it goes up and down and is broken by other features of punctuation means that it doesn't feel like a run-on sentence. It just feels like many sentences that mold together really well into one big long line. And this linguistic device, if you will, is also present in The Last Kingdom, which I read, and I have to say I prefer third-person run-on sentences. It makes more sense that way. It doesn't feel like someone is speaking them to you, which helps them feel a little less unnatural. And having begun writing fan fiction for Sharpe, and trying to emulate Cornwell's style as much as possible, I have no idea how he does it. I have no idea how he writes them so well that you're able to forget that you're reading a very long sentences without a break. No clue. And I love it. Don't know how it's going to happen to me, but I'm trying. Maybe I'll get to be that good in the future. I don't know. This is quite possibly the longest intro I have ever done to a single book in my life, especially considering this book is quite short and doesn't have that much substance to it. But one thing I do feel is worth a mention is the beginned retconning of Sharpe's backstory that starts in Sharpe's Tiger. And basically, the idea is that Sharpe's Tiger, while it is the first book chronologically within the Sharpe universe, it is not the first book written in the series, as I said in the intro before. The first book is Sharpe's Eagle. And the thing is that when Sharpe's Eagle came out, it was his backstory that he lived in London his whole life, and that was where he got recruited into the army. He's literally lived nowhere else in his life other than London and wherever the army decided to take him. And of course, when Sean Bean came on the production in the early 90s, that was not going to be an option because he has a very strong Yorkshire accent, and that just can't be waved away. You can't say, oh, he lived in London his whole life, but he has a very strong accent that is not from London. So Bernard Cornwell, when he started writing prequels for the series, Sharpe's Tiger was released in 1997, which was after the original run of the Sharpe TV show. He retconned Sharpe's backstory in order to include the Sheffield part and actually make it make sense that he has a Yorkshire accent. So his new backstory goes that he lived in London until his mid-teens and he killed someone in a fight, and in order to escape the ensuing punishment he would probably get, he ran away to Sheffield, where he set up in an inn and became a burglar of coaches, like cars, and stole luggage and things like that. He got into an argument with the innkeeper over a girl, and in order to escape punishment the second time, he joined the army. And I'm just saying that because from this point on, I believe the books have that backstory, but I would assume that when you get to some of the earlier books like Sharpe's Eagle and onwards, it might have that fully London backstory. I thought it would be nice to mention, and I did kind of want to talk about it, so. Okay, sorry, I know I've spent a lot of time rambling on about this book, but I had a bunch of other thoughts, and I wanted to say them before I actually got into the plot. By the way, spoiler warning for this book and every other book after it, they will all be spoiled heavily if you go any further into the video. So the plot itself is decent. It's reasonably interesting for a first book. It's set in 1799 during the siege of Seringapatam in India. Sharpe is a private in the British Army doing ye old British Empire things. He has a somewhat mindless existence there, just fighting people and trying to protect his girlfriend from his sergeant and everyone else, and the sergeant hates Will, provokes Sharpe into punching him, and uses that as an excuse to sentence Sharpe to 2,000 lashes, which is a death sentence obviously, but they stop after 200. Now, the central outside conflict of the story is that the Tipu Sultan, a Muslim, has violently usurped the local Hindu leadership in the area with the help of the French, and has set up in a fortified city called Seringapatam, which is the main location of the book. And he's captured a Scottish colonel, McCandless, who I mentioned earlier, who was spying for Sharpe's superiors, and Sharpe himself is sent with a lieutenant, William Lawford, to rescue this guy and bring him back. And they pose as deserters. Sharpe's really badly injured, so that seals up their story. The regiment they're leaving behind are planning to attack Seringapatam from the west, which the Tipu Sultan anticipates. He's made a trap there, and Colonel McCandless's info is that there is a trap there, and not to go for an attack there. But he was captured before he could make it back to the encampment to let them know. Sharpe tried to make it back to the camp during a battle, but Will thwarts him. That was really frustrating. Eventually, Sharpe and Lawford get exposed as spies, and then they get put in prison with McCandless. Blah, blah, blah. Middle. Sharpe ends up blowing the mine under the walls of the city. That's the trap on the west side, so the Tipu can't use it. And then the British take the city, and he ends up killing the Tipu and taking his jewels. Oh, and his girlfriend leaves him. That's something. She marries someone in the actual city. Overall, I think this is a pretty good start to the series. If you are reading the books from the in-universe chronological order, we get a nice look at Sharpe's personality and what makes him tick. We get a reasonably simple conflict for him to be a part of. We understand his position within the army and the general social dynamics that exist with it. And what I really like is that Sharpe had been written to be very likeable, even in the first book, where you would have to probably read a few more books in the series to really appreciate him. Even though he's snappy and sometimes a bit blunt with the people around him, people want to be friends with him, people want to ally themselves with him, and people even say that he's kind and sweet and gentle when he wants to be. And this is probably best exemplified in his relationships with Lawford, his lieutenant, and McCandless. They like him. McCandless and Lawford even help him to read, and they think that he's kind, and they enjoyed working with him. And I think that's just really sweet, and that's something that you probably don't see very often. He would probably just be this normal macho guy, but no, he's actually quite nice. My only real complaint is that the beginning of the book is actually pretty boring. Up until Sharpe infiltrates Seringapatam with Lawford, I found the whole sequence of events where Sharpe is at the camp fighting over a girl with his superiors kind of dull and not really what I signed up for. And I'm not saying that purely because I'm a Harper Sharpe shipper. I mean, yeah, I'm very staunch, but I don't mind seeing Sharpe have relationships with women. If I minded it, I would have just gone right to the book where Harper first shows up and not even read any of these. I just didn't find it interesting watching this whole thing play out. And the battle scenes sometimes drag a bit as well, and I think Cornwell's reliance on run-on sentences really hurts him there. I also found the mechanisms of the trap that was outside Seringapatam quite difficult. I think it's meant to be two walls. The second wall is hidden behind the first, and there's like all the mines and bombs between them, so the army will go in there and it'll blow up under their feet. But it did take a little while for me to get that. But ultimately, none of that is anywhere near bad enough to actually completely sully my enjoyment of the book, except for fucking Hakeswill. That guy pisses me off. I remember I was trying to buy a copy of Sharpe's Enemy online, and the synopsis is literally that Hakeswill has trapped a bunch of French and British women on a hillside, and Sharpe has to rescue them. It's the 16th book. I have to sit through 16 or more books of this motherfucker. Ridiculous. Anyway, Sharpe's Tiger gets 3 out of 5 stars. Good job.